got this card. I got the card that got pulled. So nice. Wheel of Fortune, number
Mm.
10, the beautiful hands and the kind of wheel of flowers. Um, yeah. And then we have the Thoth, which is different. And I don't have the Rider Waite. I don't know if anyone has the Rider Waite.
I'm just shuffling my deck trying to find it now.
Someone here has it for sure.
Ah, ha, ha, ha. Here it is.
Aha.
Mhm. Some Hebrew signs there, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these guys are sort of avatars of the four directions.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to do with the four apostles, right?
And the
The
four
angel,
signs.
the eagle. Sorry?
And the four fixed signs. So it's Leo,
Ah.
Scorpio, Taurus, and Aquarius.
Oh yeah, hence the bull. And lion must be Leo.
Mm-hmm.
Eagle and angel?
Yeah, I was reading in the book. They said it was the fixed signs of Leo, Scorpio.
The angel, I think, is Aquarius, and the eagle is also connected to a snake.
From this book, she says there's the set snake, the god of darkness. It's going down and kind of this rebirth thing. And then what does she say here? Originally, these four figures represented the four fixed signs of Babylonian astrology: Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, and Taurus. And then the Christians identified them with the four evangelists, which we see them holding books, guardians of heaven. And they became the symbol of the four basic elements of ancient and medieval science. But then you also got the wands, cups, swords, and pentacles as well. So
that's the idea always of bringing in all four. It's about the whole.
it's cool looking at the four boxes on my screen. Here we are.
And it's the whole in motion, right? It's turning, the wheel turns.
Yeah.
I think that's really important, that the whole isn't the whole if it's static, that there's always movement, and one always becomes the next. I guess when you think about it, like in the zodiacal way, we're always going around that wheel of Sarah, help me.
Sky.
Oh, sky, that's what they call it nowadays. Yeah.
Thank God we have an astrologer with us for
Yes,
because
I love to relieve the tension here.
Yeah, what I was reading, they were talking about the history of where they would intentionally, like in the rituals, and I don't know, I don't recall like what era or what tradition per se, but how they would intentionally make the king fall, right, to bring the goddess back up, so that it was always honoring the goddess so she could come and be reborn. So they would take whoever was the present king and intentionally kind of kill him off. Just so things don't get static or just that wheel's turning. So, and I sort of took that as also like kind of the ego or the will, where you've got to engender that humility. You've got to sometimes when you think you're all at the top and everything's like super great, it's like also remembering that it's turning and that's dissolving, and that change is love, transformation is love, and it needs to keep taking on different forms so that it can know what it is.
And humility is the perfect word, because it's going down into the humus, into the soil. It's the humus, and I just think of hummus. I'm like, oh, I'd like to go down into the humus. But yeah, like, and obviously that's where we're reborn.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we're seeds falling off trees, if there's any kind of analogy between human experience and life and stuff, I don't know where I'm going with this, and the other beings that we share the planet with, plants and stuff, the idea of falling down into the ground and then coming up again. And it's certainly what our ancestors believed, or like what people think our ancestors believed. The burial mound, I think I told you guys this before, but I read somewhere that they took a guy, some Native American guy, And they took him to Silbury Hill, which is that amazing mound that I've told you about so many times. And they were like a bunch of British archaeologists and people interested in this stuff, and they take this, I think it was a bunch of Native American guys, and they're like, what do you make of our monuments? Like, what do you think of them? I'm like, well, it's really obvious. They're pregnant bellies. Like, to them, it was just like, and if there is, so I do think like the reason why, you know, the traditions that Holly's describing are the sort of traditions that you see all across the world in different, slightly different forms, but they seem to be like a common form of just like, that's how humans interact with the world. And so I take, yeah, those Native American guys' perspective on this very seriously, because they live a lifestyle that's closer to what the people who built those mounds live than any British archaeologist does. And so that idea, anyway, it's a long way around of saying this idea of looking at those tombs. Silbury Hill isn't actually a tomb. That's one of the reasons why it's so mysterious. But looking at all those mounds that we have all across the British Isles and saying they're like pregnant bellies, there's something about that, about the idea that you go down into the ground and then you are reborn. Yeah, that speaks very deeply to humanity. Feels very alive at this time of year as well.
I read this morning from this book again, and something especially stood out, especially since, well, it's Harvest Moon, I believe, and Isaiah is actually celebrating the Harvest Festival. And I thought this may be a different take, a kind of different take on destiny, because the card is also to do with destiny, right?
Yeah.
Every harvest is a result of sowing, and destiny is not what one could have done, but rather the effect of what one actually did. So kind of the idea of you make your own destiny. What you sow, you will reap. And that we are the beings whose being is the cause of this wheel turning.
Yeah, I feel like there's something in there about awareness of it. Like, because and actualization of that awareness. Like, that's kind of like what that was saying there, is like, okay, because the awareness stays suspended, but actualizing on that makes the wheel go round.
Yeah, I was thinking about the harvest and the pregnant belly. That was great. And how you pick the fruit when it's at its prime, you know? And again, the tradition of bearing the king when he's kind of at its height and at his prime, that you, when things are really sweet and ripe and ready, not, you know, it's like not clinging. It's like not clinging onto that state, but letting it feed the next thing. And how hard that is. I mean, it's so hard when things are going fairly well, or you know, you love something really deeply and you want it to sort of stay in that static place. And this is a, and I think fortune, you know, I think like Lizelle was talking about destiny and intention and moving with, this isn't a fully formed thought, but something about like not getting in the way of that cycle. And you actually, I think, improve your luck, like you improve your fortune, you improve your destiny, or you create it, as Lizelle was sort of pointing to, when you honor sort of the bigger, when you take that more greater perspective, that more omniscient perspective of the whole, and move things to where they naturally want to kind of go, versus like what you want, and like it's like surrendering, you know, surrendering to the bigger picture, to the bigger goddess, to the pregnant belly.
Can I just, something that you said, quoting me, I just want to rectify because I changed my mind. I think it should rather be co-creating rather than creating. We are co-creating our destiny rather than creating, because I don't think we have the power to create out of nothing. But we need to participate with life. I
was just going to say, I guess that's the trick of the little character on the Rider-Waite. It's the Sphinx on top of the wheel. Like, to stay on top of the wheel, you have to be in constant motion. You can't just stay. It's kind of like a hamster situation. You have to keep moving your feet and keep moving. Recognize that what you're standing on is moving and move with it. And I think the temptation to try and turn the wheel backwards and get back to some place where things were right and you felt safe and things were good, and often an imaginary place, or to try and stay still, like Holly's saying, and like hoard that fruit because it's so sweet and it's so good right now, instead of putting it down in the earth where it belongs and letting the seeds germinate and start something new. Although, I mean, that's my interpretation, but the Sphinx thing on top of the Rider-Waite card does look pretty static. So
well, and that's interesting because they're fixed signs too, and the fixed signs are the staying signs. So you have mutable signs that are like moving you into the season, and I forgot the name of the other ones, but they're like taking you out. And so yeah, that's interesting that these are fixed signs that they're highlighting on the cards, but still like with the idea of transitioning through all of them. And also like what I'm thinking about too is because I was hearing in what Holly was saying, that idea of participating with like surrendering to the greater. And what is interesting about what Issa's doing is like the country that she's in is celebrating the harvest, and like surely there's feast involved in that, but actually fixing in the I'm going to stay in this fasting state for the 3 days. So that's coming to mind for some reason. So I'm interested in like why you chose to do a fast during the time the whole world around you is devouring their fruits, their labors.
That is interesting. I also had that thought after we sit on the date. I don't know, something about it being a full moon made sense to me. And yeah, I feel like at the end of the day, because these harvest rituals, and the one in Korea, like it's ancient too. Like people say it is the biggest holiday in Korea still, and it's probably something that started with shamans and like stuff a long, long time ago, like much of the harvest rituals everywhere. And yeah, there's a bit about that, but I guess to me, a lot of this ritual is also similar to what we talked before, like kind of gratitude for ancestors. There's a lot of food preparation that is not even for people eating themselves, it's just as offerings. So there's something, I think, fasting, it makes me think, I think Holly said something like this at some point, that like after a few days, like you really start to feel your gut, and you really start to feel like the creatures and things that also live inside you and how they affect you, and I don't know, I guess it makes me think a little bit of that thing you were saying, that we go down to the earth and come back, but we also come back in different shapes. I remember hearing this and it really stuck with me, about how so many cultures have like, or just like this one, like these altars filled with food and stuff, and offerings for the ancestors. And someone was saying like, I think this was a podcast, and the guy interviewing was like, yeah, but what happens the next day? You just throw it all out, and then a raccoon picks it up. And the guy was like, well, who are you to say that the raccoon is not your ancestor? Right? So I think there's something about that for me. I think something about trying to connect to something a bit more unearthed, something deeper. And I think fasting helps with that. Like I think food, no matter what, is a very, at least for me, is a very social thing. Like the feasting and the celebrating, it's all about a recognition of each other, and we made it through together. And at least for me this time, it really felt like I needed to kind of go inwards and I guess let the moonlight be my food. But yeah, no, I was thinking that as well. I don't know, I have a lot of thoughts of what you guys just said. The one thing about the thing you said, Holly, about how you have to pick things when they're the ripest, and it also reminds me of this saying. I don't know how it goes exactly, but something along the lines of like the sweetest things always turn the most bitter. Like there's something about or I think the translation, because it's a saying in Latin, is something like the corruption of the best is the worst. Like there's something about letting things that are really good stay longer than they should, because you think, you're like, oh, that's so good, then we should keep it this way. And that's when things start going really bad. But it's hard to see, because you you've been so used to it being the best thing. So I think there is definitely a lot of wisdom in being able to know when it's the right time for things to be picked and passed on, and not staying with things. That's a theme that has been coming up so much this last week, which is interesting. But this idea of like things need to be changing, and like so much of human like brilliance and capacity to adapt to everything is precisely about that. Is about like moving in every context. Like I noticed it, like sitting is not bad. Sitting 8 hours a day is bad because you're not moving. Or like stress in itself is, we are equipped to deal with stress. If you have permanent stress, then you're gonna get ill. So it seems to me like every illness comes from trying to stay in a fixed state.
Mm.
And it seems like the same thing happens at a bigger scale. And I guess just my last thought for now is that also, Holly, that that gift you sent us with cards and images, it really also struck me because it's something I've been thinking of, like this idea that sometimes when we look at a situation, we look at what happened, and maybe we should also look at what was even possible to happen. Like there's something about that possibility of things, like was there any other way? Were the tools there? Was the context there? Were the things there for things to have happened another way? And I think there's a lot of that. I guess I'm highly speculating here, but there's my first instinct is to say that, yeah, I think a lot of the work that we have to do, I don't know, in the next years or so is figuring that out, is how to open windows for possibility without inviting chaos. I don't know, I guess part of the human endeavor is that balance. Like, how do you not restrict everything so to be in stasis and things like decaying without possibility for life, but also not just like complete disregard for anything to the point that, well, nothing is possible either if everything is possible, if that makes sense. I don't know.
It's so beautiful. It makes me think of something that John always talks about. He says if he asks his students, if he pushes a pen and he asks his students what makes it move, and they say usually it's the force. Long story short, because he tells it's very elaborate, people don't think to say that there's open space in front, and that's why the pen can move. So that open space that makes possible. That's what I hear what you speak now. And that feels very appropriate for a fast. It's like you create the open space for some possibility. And
I was talking to someone the other day, to a client, about the potential for creating ritual to bring a romantic partner into his life. And we were talking about exactly that, about the making space in psyche for someone to step into it, which got us talking about, if you imagine like a piece of card, a black piece of cardboard with the shape of a lady, because he's looking for a lady, cut out of it, you could make that very detailed, right? So you could put like the silhouette of pigtails, or the silhouette of like, you could make a certain height, a certain, you could make a very specific shape for a very specific woman to step into. Or you could just cut like a big circle or a big square in that piece of paper and see who comes through. And there seems to be some sort of like, and what Issa's saying about opening windows to possibility without letting chaos in. There's something about making that window an appropriate shape. Because maybe you don't want a French door just to let any old whatever in. You don't want to open like but you probably don't want like a tiny little very specific shaped window either, because then you're only going to let in the possibilities that conform to that exact shape. And it makes me think again of what we were saying a couple of months ago about building a temple or building an altar and seeing who turns up. Build a temple, start praying, see who turns up. If you wait like to figure out who you're praying to before you start praying, you might never get going. So something like, I don't know, I guess what I'm saying, and I guess I say this all the time, but it's because it's something I struggle with, obviously. For me to keep moving, I have to not stop thinking, but dial down that kind of like critical aspect of my brain that is saying, like, you know, oh, before we go to this thing, I should probably look at exactly where it is on Google Maps, and then look at the street view so I know what the exterior looks like, and then read the reviews quickly. And then like all this research you can do before you go to a place, and then you never get there because it's you. Yeah.
Mm.
So something about like movement requiring maybe it's trust. Maybe that's what I'm saying. I don't know.
There's such a like paradox happening in my brain about like what everybody's saying. It's like there's this like fixed nature about it, because you're saying a window, now see who comes through. Don't fix it on a particular figure or a particular form. So there's like there's a transient nature about what comes through the fixedness. And you and I were talking, Rebecca, yesterday about like getting fixed into a label and like saying particularly this, as opposed to like, no, actually it's me, like I'm still here, I'm fixed, but it's not stuck on a particular label. Like you can't put Campbell's soup on me. And so there's something like very transient about my fixedness. So that's like the paradox that I'm like buzzing about. And there seems to be something about a wheel being fixed, but it turns too.
Whoa, yeah. That seems like worth exploring deeper. Like, what is the axle that the wheel's turning around?
It's also kind of this symbol, which is
yes.
the fixed. Yeah. And this book also speaks of how the I Ching was probably born. That the Chinese, they had like a fixed wheel and a wheel that moved, and then how they met would be the upper and the lower trigram, and something like that. So that, and it also makes me think, because for some reason he ends with a quote from Parmenides, who believed that there is no such thing as becoming. And of course, the wheel turning is the idea of becoming. So then that, of course, made me think, Sarah, we talked about Plato reconciling the two, like there is no change or everything is change. And Plato said, no, there's being, that which is eternal, and then there's becoming, that which moves. And
Forms.
Idols.
I keep coming back to ether and the hub, the center of the wheel. My mind always keeps coming back to the sacred or divine will. And kind of what I'm hearing is like not foreclosing on a dream or a vision, right? Not foreclosing on it by having too specific or too particular of a form, that it needs to look like this. But that center is more actually like, from my experience, like a feeling. It's more of like a sense of homeness, or a sense of spaciousness, or a sense of groundedness that is pretty fixed. And it's that kind of thy will, which is so interesting, because I've been reflecting a lot on Christ, and I am the way, it's like I find myself often in prayer and just going, I surrender, I surrender, I surrender, I trust you, universe, I trust you, universe, I trust you. And then there's also this interesting thing of like, I trust the universe, I'm opening up to it, I'm surrendering to it, but it's also me, it's also like, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the light. So it's like this really interesting oscillation between inner and outer. And then just recognizing, like, again, not getting too fixed on the form of it, but really deepening into the feeling of like, I want to move, I want to, whatever it is I'm calling in, whatever it is, it's like an expansion of unconditional love. It's an expansion of wisdom. It's an expansion of divine presence. and whatever that looks like, my mind is not nearly as powerful as the universe's imagination. And so it's really just trying to call that in. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic between surrender and also agency. And I'm really curious what you all think about, because this is a lot, also has to do with fate, you know, and what you all think about fate and destiny. We sort of touched a little bit on destiny, etymology there, destination, you know, pilgrim's path in a way. And yeah, what do you all think about fate?
I just want to, there's a play on the word with we do the pronunciation a little bit weird. Thy will be done.
Mm,
I love wordplay.
yeah, that's great. Love that. Yeah.
I thought a lot about fate in the context of the free will debate, which was like a thing that I was hung up on for a long time. I wrote a script for a graphic novel about like a character who was struggling with the free will question, because I was struggling with the free will question. I was like working it through in that way. But the thing with graphic novels is they take such a long time to write and draw that by the time I got the script written and I had all the sketches and I started on the final drawings, and my mind had so dramatically shifted, like the way I thought about the philosophy that was being illumined by the novel. I was just like, and other stuff, many things. But anyway, I dropped that project. But yeah, it was such a preoccupation because I was thinking about it for myself and I was thinking about it for the characters, and I had characters in the book that represented all the different perspectives. Well, obviously not all of them because there's probably infinite perspectives, but you know, all the major players in that debate. Anyway, I basically, well, at the beginning of writing the book, I came at it from a hard, very hard materialist perspective, in that, you know, like everything was set in play from the beginning, from the Big Bang, and it's just playing out. And therefore, everything that's going to happen will happen because it's just like dominoes falling. And if there is quantum randomness or something like that, which I wasn't convinced of, and I'm still not convinced of, I don't know enough about quantum anything to be convinced or deconvinced of it. But anyway, even if there is, that's randomity, yeah, whatever. That's not free will. That's randomity. So it doesn't like give you the thing that you want, which is free will. And then obviously I got to thinking about what free will is and what I really meant by that, and what we were after when we talked about, do we have free will? And the way that I mean, I want to say determinists, but the people who don't believe in free will, because they're not necessarily determinists, but the people who don't believe in free will sort of define it, is that it's the power to have done otherwise, something like that. And yet, when you actually dig into the philosophers who are pro free will, or are just a bit more like, hey, maybe, they define free will differently. They define it more like agency, which is obviously like an experiential thing. So anyway, what I realized is that from the hard materialist perspective, I don't know what else to call it, that's kind of how I thought of myself. Like, I'm not going to, sorry, this is like one of my pet topics, so excuse me whilst I rant, but yeah, from that perspective, and I saw it as a brave perspective to take, right? Because I'm facing the uncomfortable truth, and I'm not going to make up shit or delude myself. I'm going to see things as they really are, and what they really are is matter in space and nothing else. We don't have evidence for anything else, so why should we suppose it's there? Let's just get down to brass tacks. And what I realized is that that's a perspective that is an invention, right? Because this is a perspective of like the objective view of reality. It's kind of a God side perspective, and I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of the the anti-free will philosophers come down from the Enlightenment and come down from Western cultures and traditions and stuff. In fact, if you look into it, like Buddhists don't even have these debates, or they do recently, but they didn't traditionally, because it's a very Western concern, that free will debate. Anyway, so there's this perspective where you look at things objectively and you say there's no free will, and there's a perspective where you look at things from an experiential perspective, and there is something, and I don't know whether we want to call it free will, but there is something. And thinking about that in terms of fate, it's like there's fate and there's freedom, and the two seem paradoxical, and yet we're humans and we are paradoxical, and we exist with both. And the only way to solve that problem for me was to come back round to humility, and to sacrifice some of that sense of like, and to realize how absurd it was to suppose that I could ever reach this objective God's eye view and make a judgment on such a question, just if I read enough of the literature, which is kind of what I thought would happen. To live with the paradox of freedom and free will, and to be fated, to be a creature that is fated and free, that is what it is to be human. And that is why we're so fucked up.
Say more
Well,
about
that's-
why we're fucked up. I'm curious. Sorry, I need more clarity on that.
I don't know. I feel like life would be easy if we were entirely fated or entirely free. I feel like a lot of what we struggle with is the tension between the two.
I wanted to comment exactly on that. That's why we're so fucked up. Because I want to say, I don't know what, but I would say that's rather why we're so adorable or something. Something else, because when you just started speaking of, like, you know, the materialistic view, and like you make it sound so mechanical and so you know, cold and dead, and I was looking at you, one of the most animated people I know, and it's so like, yeah, no, it doesn't add up, you know, it doesn't, this cold, everything is just dominoes falling, and whom I see just doesn't add up. So there's something there that's unique and precious, and I don't know if it's fate or freedom that made it, but you know, it's not just a domino falling, that's for sure.
And when I was going through that phase of my life, I was in therapy and taking it pretty seriously. And I had a 40-minute walk to my therapist's office and a 40-minute walk home. And I used to have these visions of being like a knife cutting through reality. And I thought, I didn't actually do it. I cut my hair very short, but I never shaved my head. But I wanted to shave my head. I wanted to be the clean, pure. Yeah, there was something about that, and you're right, it's not me. But it was like, I felt like I could just tidy up all those, you know, trim myself to make myself into this shape. And obviously the reason why I say, and when I say that's why we're so fucked up, I say it with love, because I love the fact that we're all fucked up. Like, I think that's the beauty. I think fucking is wonderful. So yeah. I think there's great joy in acknowledging, because part of what I was trying to do is become the perfect rational machine. So for me to say I'm fucked up is actually quite liberating. But then perfect freedom sounds like too much responsibility for my liking. So
Horrible. It sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Absolute freedom sounds horrible.
So I think that the balance between the fixed signs on the card and the wheel moving in the middle that's actually a really nice illustration of that.
There's like things that are coming up that like they're just tangentially relevant to what you just said. But one of them was that quote by Terence McKenna that just keeps coming up about how science is based on the principle that you afford one miracle, which is the Big Bang. You know, it's like, okay, so now you can
yeah.
that's the axle that it's all turning on.
Yeah.
And another thing that just kept popping in my head was an old professor of mine of biology, ecology actually, and he would just refuse to allow us to use the word random. He was like, haphazardly, you are haphazardly doing things, you are not randomly doing things. So he was like really adamant that we can use that word in our abstracts or our papers. Nothing is random, he would say. It's all haphazardly placed. So I thought that was something that really wanted to be said too. And of course, you know, as an astrologer, like the way that I look at that mandala or the astrological chart is that is what is fixed. that's the universe. We're looking at a picture of the universe. There's the planets, that's where they're placed, but they shift just a little bit every moment. And those aspect lines, which was interesting because what John brought up in After Socrates, one of the first episodes, he was like, we're going to call these aspects. And I was like, are we now? Because that's what astrologers do, is like the way that planets are in aspect to one another describes a different energy, as we'll say in astrology, because that's the language that we use. And even though it sounds very ethereal and it doesn't, yeah, but that means that there's play in it. Like two people could have very similar charts, like Rebecca and I have very similar charts. Like our sun and our moon is nearly exactly the same, and we're only one rising sign off. But clearly we display our attributes in different ways. And so, or these aspect lines, they'll manifest in different ways. So there's something there about, even like, you know, of course, like different people are going to have different charts, but the way that I play the game is going to be different. Like there's a way that you can be grabbed. So this would be that agency that we're talking about. There's a way you can be grabbed by the planet, because the planets in Vedic astrology were called grahas, which literally means grabbed. This is something my instructor says all the time, so I have that like memorized. So those planets and being ruled by a god, you could say, will grab you. And you can either allow yourself to be grabbed by the planet and pulled opposite, contrary to the wheel, because there's secondary motion and there's primary motion. So at all times, the constellations are moving around us, which is a product of the spin of the Earth, even though it looks like they're spinning around us. So you could say, oh, all the stars are moving in this direction, but these weird planets, they're just dancing around. And so you get grabbed by a planet that's dancing instead of just going with the natural order of things. So there's agency in this fixed structure still.
I'm thinking of Calvin. This is also something that's really close to my heart. My master thesis was on Calvin's Providentia Dei, and I'm probably not saying exactly what he's saying, but he was very Providentia Dei, the providence of God taking care of his creation was very important to him, and it got a bit bad rep because people associated it with the idea of election, that people are predestined to be saved or not. Sarah, you and I talked about that, and so he separated it in his later institutes so that people will not see it as the same. So that predestination and the providence of God is seen separately. Like people, and I like to focus on this providence of God, because what that is the divine's continual interaction with creation and with individuals in the unfolding of history. That is providence, and there's something open in that, for me at least, where in predestination there's nothing open, it's fixed fate. But I like this providence idea. And then it's also that idea of we create history with the divine. That's also actually in the tradition.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, who the fuck's in charge, you know? Because when Lizelle says something, it affects what I say next, you know? So this idea too that we even are in a vacuum. You know, right now Issa's gut is making a lot of decisions for her, you know? Like her bacteria is making decisions for her. It's moving her. The water moves me, you know, when I'm thirsty. It affects my actions and my behavior. And so again, it's sort of breaking down this notion of being of recognizing that we're a composite of so many different things. And from my estimation and from my experience and my beliefs, so much intelligence. I mean, the bacteria has intelligence. This wouldn't, or this whatever it is, this used to be Earth, or it still is Earth. This countertop that I'm on. It's, to me, it's still very much alive, and it also has an intelligence to it, and so we're just constantly interacting. So also this sense that, you know, again, there's some like vacuum fixed thing that's just making decisions with, you know, that is in a constellation of so many different intelligences is really interesting. There's just such a beauty, though, you know, there's such a beauty in the fact that when Lizelle speaks, then something in me moves to speak. So then there's this beautiful thing, this dance of like, you're not separate from me. You are a part of who I am and what I say and who I'm becoming. It gives me a lot of gratitude, you know, of like, these aren't my words. These aren't just my words. They're all of our words in some ways.
I love that, and I think it's going on within us as well. Like Sarah was saying about identity, you know, that temptation to put an adjective or whatever, a noun on oneself, and then try and fix. But actually, Holly calls forth a different aspect of me than Lizelle calls forth. You know, like there are so many different ways of being Rebecca, and some of them come out more often than others, and some I'm more proud of than others. But like there's a wheel within me as well of like, when people talk about rising to the occasion, like which aspect of self is going to rise to this occasion, which is being called forth, and which are you going to allow to come forth? And having because of course the sort of the objectivist, materialist position, or the you know, whatever you call it, that thing, is aiming for one type of Rebecca to come forth, and then to stay that way. And ideally she won't even be called Rebecca, because she won't have a name, she won't have a personality, she'll just be like the eye that sees all. But yeah, allowing that for there to be different aspects to self, and to realize there's something beautifully, and it's kind of like cyclical but also spiraling upwards, hopefully, in that like each time you revisit those aspects of self, you know, they're richer, or maybe it's spiraling downwards because they're richer and deeper. I don't know which way it's going, but there's like, despite the fact that you're cycling, there's movement. So I don't know,
Both ways.
I was thinking of the design of the card with the 4 fixed things in the wheel, and like, I mean, 2 things come to mind. First is that those need to be fixed for you to have any sense of movement, right? Like if everything is moving and the wheel is moving too, then there's no way to have a sense of movement. So there's something about like, you need the fixed structure to have a sense of change. But then the other thing I was thinking right now, when we're talking about identity and how we change, I was like, well, who are we in that picture, right? In that image? Because maybe the first thing to be is like, oh yeah, I'm the Sphinx on top of the wheel. But actually, I was thinking like, maybe we're the space between the wheel and the fixed things. Like, I don't know. I feel like there's something else. Maybe it's that space that allows the wheel to turn. And in that sense, it feels a bit more like what we were saying. Like there is a bit of agency. We are also pushing the wheel. We're not entirely at the mercy of it either. It's like but maybe realizing that we have that power is also a whole other a whole other task. And I guess I don't know, in self knowledge, I guess, because I feel like to me that's been a recurring theme of like the reason why it's so scary sometimes to change or go into a completely different context or do something that you know is irreversible is because you don't know who you're going to be on the other side. Like there are things that you cannot go back on once you do them. And it's a sense of, well, will I lose myself after I do that? Like, is there anything of the real Isabella that's going to stay there? I think a lot of the reason why we stay with fear and misery and all of these things is because we know ourselves in those. And we're probably scared of not knowing if we're going to be able to stay tethered to our core self once we're in another change. And I think the trust that you're talking about, Rebecca, is a bit of that as well. It's like trusting that I will be there on the other side in some other shape that I probably don't recognize right now, but I will be there. Yeah, not sure where I'm going with this, but I thought that was interesting. It was really like that exercise, like who are we on that picture?
Mm.
It's easy to think that we're the sphinx of one of the creatures, but I don't think we are.
How does the wheel help us face that transformative experiences?
The fact that I mean, I've thought this when I've gone through periods of depression. The first one's always the worst because you don't know you're going to come out. But once you've been through a couple, you're like, okay, like I know the sun comes up again. And it's hard to actually know it in a kind of like embodied, deep way, because you're depressed. But even that, like intellectually, you know that this doesn't last forever. And you've been, so there's something in that. And like imagine how bleak the winter would be if you didn't know the sun was going to come back and the days were going to get longer again. I was thinking when Issa was talking about like that you don't know who you're going to be on the other side, you don't know who you're going to be when you come back up, and it's like such a terrible burden to place on yourself, that like that feeling that you have to be the one alone to maintain self and to I don't know, I feel like maybe the little characters around the edge are kind of like your friends. Like you can let go of being Issa for however long, and then you come back up and here we are and we remember who Issa is and we'll remind you. Like you don't have, it's not like, I feel like we're very like, and when I say we, I mean we Western people maybe, this idea that self is this project that you have to do completely alone. I think that's too hard for anyone to manage, really. And it, like, yeah.
I think part of it is that omniscience, that recognition there is a wheel, right? That there is a wheel, and this is part of the unchanging part, that we are in a constant state of change and unchanging patterns in a way, like winter, fall, spring, summer. And I think that's why this wheel project we've been doing together is so powerful, because we're acknowledging the constant change and moving with it, anticipating it, honoring it. And so, like you're saying, sometimes for me, it's this oscillation between the universal and the particular. And if I'm too stuck in the particular, I need to move out into the universal. Too much in the universal, I need to move back into the particular. So I think the knowledge of the wheel, it's stepping back. That omniscience, in a way, is a really powerful. It leads to surrender, for me at least. It's like, oh, this is part of something much bigger, and I have to trust. Again, trust is such a big word. Trust also being rooted in the etymology of truth, and that one of the mantras that's been coming up for me lately is change is love. Change is love. Delta. He says delta. Delta is love. So that when things are changing, the wheel's turning, it's love, and it's a new perspective. And I sense that part of what we are doing here as humans is to try to get as many different perspectives and experiences in our lives as possible, to see things from as many different angles as possible, the richness of being alive. And I guess I have another question, like, for you all. I'm curious about your thoughts about then what, again, fortune, we're talking about kind of luck as well, and what's your sense of what calls in good luck versus what calls in bad luck, good fortune versus bad fortune, because I do think there's something there. There's something about intention. There's something about moving with the wheel or moving against it that, again, I guess there is that sense of agency in writing the narrative and having a part in the co-creating of the narrative, of the destiny, of the fate.
Well, I would like to start on the luck idea because it's been very prominent for me nowadays. I've always said I'm very lucky with female friendships and very unlucky with romantic partnerships with men. But it's come to my attention that I'm really good at female friendships. I hope so, at least. I think I am, otherwise I wouldn't have deserved it. And I'm really bad at romantic relationships. So there's also agency in good luck and bad luck in a certain way. I think, like if you cultivate your skills in a particular field, you're more likely to be lucky in that field than, and maybe not. Maybe there's just such a thing as really, being my brother always calls it weerligafleier in Afrikaans, the thing that you put on to distract the thunder.
Oh, lightning rod.
Yeah, a lightning rod. Some people are just lightning rods. but I don't know. I do feel, at least to a certain extent, good luck can be cultivated.
There's a guy, a British scientist called Richard Wiseman, which is a great name for a scientist. And he did a study on luck. And I think he might have ended up writing a book about luck. And he found that extroverts are luckier.
Because I probably do things.
Exactly. They have more connections. And so therefore they're more likely to be presented with opportunities, and they're more likely to take them because they, engage with people and the world more. And I thought it was really interesting just to think about like luck being open to connections. I mean, he specifically looked obviously at extroversion and introversion because they're something you can measure if you're a psychologist. But maybe just connection in general makes you luckier. And the more connected you are into the world, the more you're paying attention, the luckier you're going to be because you notice opportunities. And maybe I don't know, and it feels like I want to say, the mystic Rebecca wants to say, like, the world starts paying attention to you and offering you more stuff.
I like that. But before you said that, the image of like someone walk and then a piano falls on their head. If you pay attention, the odds are less that's going to happen. That a piano on your head. So paying attention is maybe really important indeed.
And like where you place your attention, because immediately when Holly said that, I was like, subjective terms, bad and good. And there's something about the relationship of fortune to wealth and how we define wealth. And so wealth can be money, of course, now especially, but wealth also is very related with health. And somebody mentioned to me in the thing that I highlighted, Ritual and Rebecca, an event that I had, and she speaks multiple different languages, and she was like, it's so interesting to me that in English you say, how are you feeling, instead of just how are you? Like there's a lot about or something like that. It was something like where we ask it in a way, how are you doing, or something like that. Yeah, how are you doing? Like, what are you doing? What's your progress, or something like that. And in like, I'm learning Arabic right now, one of the main questions you ask everybody when you first meet them is, how's your health? So there's something in there about how we define fortune and what we see as good or bad luck, where that Wu Wei comes to mind too, that the farmer whose father or yeah, whatever. Anyways, so he's got a bad harvest and they're like, how do you feel about it? And he's like, whatever, is that bad or good luck? And then because his crop failed or something like that, I don't know, things happen and just the story progresses. You should read it. I'm not describing it well. But every single time somebody comes to him and they're like, oh, what bad luck you have, or what good luck you have, yay, then he's always like, we'll see. He doesn't ever put a subjective term onto it. And I think there's something in that too, of just like, this is about rolling with it, just going with it and seeing, maybe that is good, maybe that is bad, I don't know, but I'm just going to stay open to interpretation of that.
Yeah, that reminds me of this saying in Korean. There's a lot of these like 4-character sayings in Korean. I think a lot of them also come from Chinese characters. And this is one of the, I don't know, just also at a very strange time in my life where I was kind of like transitioning into, I don't know, different groups of people and stuff. And I met this person, this girl, and this is the saying she told me, so I really remember it. It's Seong-jima. And I don't know what each character translates to, but it's basically this story of like a guy who falls from his horse and breaks his leg and is like, oh my God, this is terrible bad luck. And then, and then turns out he doesn't get recruited for the war because he broke his leg. So it's kind of the same thing you're saying. It's like, what is good luck is what is bad luck in terms of measuring the value, right? Or not the value, what's the word? The valence, I guess, if it's good or bad, of any event, right? Don't know. Yeah, I don't know that I've thought a lot about luck. But one thing, just because I don't know how relevant this will be, but whenever I think of luck, I think of like 4-leaf clovers. And I remember hearing, like, there was this whole scientific study about how actually 4-leaf clovers are the most miserable ones. Like, the whole reason they came up with 4th leaf is because they were desperate for,
Oh,
so the whole reason why they actually have a 4th one is because they were actually not doing well to begin with, and in a lot of disadvantage compared to the others. So I thought it was kind of interesting that, oh, this sign of luck, this rarity, is actually the result of incredible struggle and misery. And in that sense, I do have that same thing you said, Rebecca, like how now when you go through your slumps, because you've been there before, you have a sense of this is gonna change. But in that same sense, I also have that when I'm at my highest. I'm like, well, I feel great, and I know this is not gonna last forever either. And there's something about that, about like, I don't know, not taking anything for granted and just kind of being grateful for what you are. And now it's admittedly very hard to do, but now whenever I'm in those slumps, I try to feel it too. It's like, okay, what is in here for me? Like, there is something. Like, it's not just about like, trying to get away from this as fast as I can and knowing that eventually I will be on the other side. But like, no, there's something here too. Like, there's something about this miserable, depressed state or whatever that is also, I guess, formational or just teaching me something. I was just gonna say, I guess the wheel, like, people have this idea that the wheel is staying on top of the wheel. It's not. The wheel is letting the wheel take you through every experience, right? The highs and the lows. That's the real fortune.
But you can connect that 4-leaf clover to finding beauty in the down times, because if that 4-leaf clover didn't have to struggle, it's the same thing. You work for your luck. You because you've been down in the dumps, you've cultivated some skills which brought you back up on top, and then you're moving to the next level, and maybe that's why you go down again, because you start at the bottom every time, and then you move up again. Whoa, next level, boom, at the bottom. And yeah, but it's actually beautiful to me that the 4-leaf clover had to struggle for its nutrition. And
then it's the one that's most likely to be picked as well.
Those damn humans.
This makes me want to create a luck talisman. Like, I have a lot of talismanic objects in my life, obviously, but I don't have one specifically for luck. And if I was going to create one, I would do it through, obviously through ritual, but the ritual intention would be this object is going to remind me to pay attention.
Yeah.
And to make connections, because those are the things I think that lead to luck. Well, I'd have to be 3 things, obviously. So pay attention, make connections, and something else. Trust.
Yeah.
Trust.
yes.
Well, find an object that represents those, or 3 objects that you can tie together.
Yeah, there's something really potent about, I think, about attitude here. I keep coming back to amor fati, love of fate. So like what you're saying, where it's like something that looks like a bad fortune or some blockage, right? Where it's actually an affordance. It's actually, as Bonnie would say, it's a feature, not a bug. And so these things happen, and you just go, oh, cool. Like what's it leading me to? Like you what the word that kept coming up for me was possibility. And kind of what Lisa's card that was sort of like, what's possible in this situation? What is it affording me? Where is it like leading my attention? And I do sense that attitude and attention have a huge role to play in how we experience and walk through the world. Again, with the sort of sense of what is the possibility around this? You know, every limitation has an affordance, and every affordance has a limitation to it. This has just been my practice, and where I'm being led right now is like just really keeping my attention really focused on like, where is the love, where is the light, where is the affordance, like where is the kind of goodness, like just wanting to reveal that in everything around me, you know, versus here's all the shit that's wrong. It's like I can look at that in myself, like I'm happy, you know, it's like I know I need to take self-responsibility for my own, you know, reactions and whatnot. But when I'm looking out into the world, it's like all I want to do is draw out what's beautiful and life-giving in a situation or in a context, in an environment. And for me, somehow that plays into luck, or I don't even know, you know, I don't know what we want to call it, but it definitely affects I think it affects I don't know, it affects the way my body feels, you know, for sure.
So the gospel reading this past I guess Sunday maybe was this parable about a farmer who invites people to come work in the farm, and there's like people that come daily and they get the same wages daily, and then there's some people that are just kind of standing around, and so the farmer goes up to them and he's like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, you know, we're just looking for work. He's like, okay. And it's like it's already past midday, it's the heat of the day is already done, there's been people out there laboring all day as they normally do, and he invites them to come work for a couple hours. And when they leave, he pays them first, and they get the wages of the day, those people that just came in for a couple hours. And so the normal workers come up and they're like, okay, like expecting like a bonus or something, because hey, if he's going to pay those people that only worked a couple hours, and he pays them the daily wages, and they're like, what is this? They came and worked for a couple hours and they get the same wages that we do. And he asked them, are you jealous because I'm generous? And so that's kind of what's coming up to me too, about where where our attention goes. And maybe Lizelle, I don't know if there's anything that I misrepresented there, but
No, very good.
yeah.
I guess what you just said, it just reminds me of, I think, something I've been kind of noticing for a few years now, which is this idea that like your best features are your worst features too. Like every blessing, like blessings are curses and curses are blessings. And really, like, when is it one versus the other? And I think what you just said just made me realize, I think the difference, like the thing that really turns a curse into a blessing is attention. Like knowing exactly, like having that, it's such like a, I don't know if it's like this precise thing, like picking the fruit at the right time, or something a bit more less, because it, like being so precise feels clinical to some extent, which I don't like. But yeah, I think there's something there about attention and how really that's the thing that will really kind of turn anything into luck, or turn a curse into a blessing.
I want to play a little bit more with what the parable Sarah quoted, because that idea of being jealous of the one who bestows the gift because he or she gives gifts to others, and like because he's generous, because life is generous to some, and then others are jealous. I feel that's something that it's that attitude that Holly referred to that can totally like poison you. Well, if you have like rejoicing for the fact that, whoa, those people only had to work like 2 hours and they got full pay, yay, lucky for them, good for them. It just makes you different. It changes your entire way of being, and that just seems So important to appreciate the generosity of life, even if you are not the receiver.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And when you look at the world as not separate from you, like
That's
the raccoon taking the food, well, that's me. That's a piece of, so yeah, like I'm gonna celebrate that, because that I keep coming back to this like thing where I'm like, that's just me in a different, born at a different form at a different time. And when I can do that, it's like all I want to do is like give that person or that being all my support, you know. It's like, yeah, go for it, you know. So yeah, you can celebrate, like you said, that person didn't, maybe like I sacrificed something or wasn't so easy for me, but someone else is getting the fruits right now, and that's wonderful, because that is me, that's me. So great, someone, it's all this beautiful cycle of giving and receiving.
Sometimes you're flush and sometimes you're bust. And when you're up, it's never as good as it seems. And when you're down, you never think you'll get back up again. But life goes on. Cheers, Georgie.
I think I want to say something about the wheel and the cycles, and how for me, living with awareness of the various cycles that I exist within, you know, seasonal, lunar, and menstrual being the three that I pay the most attention to. Although I'm aware, obviously, there are many bigger ones and many smaller ones. Circadian, I guess, as well. Because of the circle shape, and you know that, like, in all traditions all across the world, people draw circles to represent wholeness and to step in and out of, and just general, and to mark space. There's something about that being held within these three circles that makes me feel safe and allows me to trust, which is exactly what you need to exist in this cyclical universe, or one of the things that you need. And just like I noticed that about my life, about when I first became aware of the wheel of the year and celebrating the seasonal cycles when I was a teenager, and how it gave me, because I had a sort of a troubled home life, and it gave me a sense of safety and connection that I desperately needed. And then when I let go of that for however many years, when I was fancying myself a rationalist, and I don't think it's a coincidence that that's the time in my life when I felt most lost, and then calling the circle back in, and becoming aware of it again, you know, 5 years ago or so, and then also calling you guys into the circle and saying, hey, look, this is this weird thing I do where I acknowledge the seasons in this idiosyncratic way, and then feeling like held in the circle of you guys as well. So it's like we were talking before about how does knowing things are cyclical help you, and I think knowing that the cycle exists and participating in it. And there's this funny thing, right? I heard this, I think it's just a general sort of neo-pagan thing, but I heard it after celebrating sunrise at Stonehenge many years ago. And people said, we turned the wheel. Like when the sun rose again, everyone was like, yes, we turned the wheel. And that thing of like, these rituals that we do, these seasonal rituals that we do, and by we I mean humanity, because obviously everyone does seasonal rituals of different types. There's this sense of, like Holly said, of honoring the movement, but also of making it happen. Like there's sort of belief that if we didn't, you know, if we didn't go and see that, I feel this most strongly, and this is the superstitious Rebecca speaking, at the winter solstice, when I go to see the sunrise. I feel it's important that I saw the sunrise. And I will sometimes jokingly send texts to my friends, pictures of the sun rising, saying, you're welcome. I got up to see this, you know, as if I made it happen. But there is that sense of like honoring, participating, and I don't know what the other word is, but making it happen. And by and not just through these specific rituals on specific dates, but by having that awareness and bring it into your life and into your friendships and into every aspect of your being, it just, for someone who's always searching for safety because of my own, private neuroses and stuff, that's it. That's the best I've been able to do, of like, I'm held by these circles and these cycles. And I think it's kind of delightfully ironic that the thing that you get from being held by the circle is the thing that you need to exist within the circle.
Well, that makes me think of this image, right? The hands holding the circle, like exactly what you're saying. She's really depicted that we're being held by something bigger.
Yeah.
The word Lizelle, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just briefly going to say that the circle and spheres, but it applies to circles too. What it always reminds me is that, geometry-wise, it's the shape that holds the most with the least amount of resources. Like, it has the smallest perimeter that can hold the most volume. And it's the same for spheres, right? They have the most, like, it's the shape that holds the most volume for the same amount of surface. So there's something about circle as well that really is like, it holds the most possibilities or the most experience or the most everything. I don't know. Just made me think of that.
I was just gonna presence the word realize and then tag Lizelle in, because there's a double meaning with realize, and that was kind of what we were leaving out with what Rebecca was saying.
Yeah, realize does all three: honor, participate, and make happen. You could just say realize. We realized the wheel. And next time I go to Stonehenge, I'll be telling all the assorted hippies about John Vervaeke.
And psychotechnologies.
Oh, they'll love it.
Maybe also mention domicile, because that's the word that came up for me when you were talking. That thing that the Greeks suffered from, that John says that's what we have in common with the Greek culture. In the meaning crisis, we've lost home. And that is exactly what the wheel is providing you, Rebecca, and I feel me as well. It's homing you again. It's giving you that sense of being home within the cycles of nature and of your own nature, and the bigger cosmos, with Sarah looking at even the biggest cosmos that we know, and that being home where we are.
Oh yeah,
it's beautiful. And I was also, because talking to you guys sometimes made me think, like I told you, I think, Holly, about how mattering, feeling you matter to something bigger than you, is really important for feeling that your life is meaningful. And then I was thinking, whatever this is, because I think we all have a sense that this is much bigger than we realize as at yet, but or we are realizing something that we don't realize what it is yet. But I know that I matter to you and you matter to me, and this is already bigger than just me. And that is already so much meaning that's being brought into my life, being part of this circle. It's really like circles, it's like, does feel like the way.
oh yeah, I like that.
It's hard to be having this conversation and not holding hands.
So, okay, what I wanted to bring up too, I like that whole thing about circles and them holding like the most potential for the given space. And something that Holly and I were talking about with the Venus sequence was the, gosh, I don't remember which mission it was anymore. One of the missions to space where they were trying to take photos of the dark side of the moon on a manned mission. So there had already been photos of maybe the dark side of the moon, but not on a manned mission. So there was 3 astronauts. One of them was in charge of the camera, and he's pissed. This was like in the maybe 70s, maybe 80s. I don't remember. Anyway, sometime, before cameras were just so ubiquitous. And so he's the one in charge of the camera. He's like, damn it. So he needs to take pictures of the dark side of the moon. And as they're orbiting around that backside of the moon, they all catch a glimpse of the Earth. And they're just like, whoa. And you've seen this image of just like the top of the Earth and it's dark on the bottom. But in that moment, they had that kind of Carl Sagan visualization of that's everything I've ever known. That's all of time. That's everybody. That's all of everything I've ever known in my entire, and it's in this sphere of potential, you know, and they can't even see the whole sphere, but that's still like, that's just what a epiphany to have.
And what an epiphany to bring back as well, because like I think a lot of the way that we think about ourselves changed when we saw that picture, when we as humanity saw that Earthrise, it's called, right?
Yes.
Yeah, when we saw that picture, and we like, obviously we'd known for some time that we're floating in space, but knowing are different things. So yeah, it's almost like, it makes me think of that the moment where you realize that you are, I don't know if this is even similar, but this just popped into my head, the moment where you realize that you're separate from your mother. The mirror stage.
But then kind of in reverse.
But it's just such a radical change in perspective.
Yeah.
Vicky, I'm separate from your mother.
Never. There's another thing about what being aware of the wheel does for you, which is interesting, which is that you start to see, or I start to see, or I start to imagine, I start to realize patterns. And I see, the winter solstice when the sun is furthest away, and I see menstruation, and I see, oh, this is the same. Something is absent that will return. And I see, the full moon, and I think about ovulation, and I see, like, I'm superimposing these cycles on top of each other, and I'm seeing common features, the waxing and the waning, and the way that, the year waxes and wanes, and the way that I wax and wanes, like, and that's very interesting and feels kind of, I don't know exactly what it feels like. It's just, I can't even really put into words what's going on there, but there's something interesting in that, like, to see those mirrored cycles, and maybe I'm just projecting, and I'm just a human seeing patterns where there aren't any. I have to accept the fact that I'm a human, so
slowly.
Yeah. And just to notice that great and small pattern that seems to operate on literally every level of being, and to be like, oh, this again. That's, and maybe it's another thing about home, about like, yeah, I don't know, but it feels really important. It feels like an important thing to notice.
You're not an isolated thing in this. You are part of it. You are.
I make sense. Yeah.
You make sense. There's a lot of, I hear Taoism in this also. That idea of, knowing the Tao by participating in the Tao. You can't name the Tao. You can just be the Tao, type of thing.
I heard the Hermetic principle of as above, so below.
Yes. As within, so without.
Can I read something that's still connected to the whole patterns? It's of course from the I Ching, number 20. You guys may know it. What 20? It's contemplation. So it's the gentle wind on the receptive earth, and Thus, also in nature, a holy seriousness is to be seen in the fact that natural occurrences are uniformly subject to law. Contemplation of divine meaning underlying the workings of the universe gives to the man who is called upon to influence others the means of producing like effect. This requires that power of inner concentration which religious contemplation develops in great women strong in faith. It enables them to apprehend the mysterious and divine laws of life, and by means of profoundest inner concentration, they give expression to these laws in their own persons. Thus, a hidden spiritual power emanates from them, influencing and dominating others without their being aware of how it happens. So that is that cultivating as above, so below, as within, so without, but that's actual cultivating that on purpose.
Mm.
Mhm.
And maybe that's what we're realizing. We're realizing ourselves in tune with the natural laws.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm glad we bring a lot of different perspectives of that natural order, natural law, because it helps to really, like, everybody's touching on the elephant kind of thing. Elephants have been really present for me lately, the image of elephants and that parable about the blind people touching the elephant in different places and not knowing what it is that they're touching. And I feel like that's kind of what we're able to do with all these different disciplines, all these different experiences, and bringing them together, as opposed to trying to just understand it from astrology, because that's going to make me a quack. Being able to like incorporate all these other understandings helps me to now refine that understanding that I have of my relationship with the universe.
You will always be my favorite quack, though, even if you do become
Quack quack.
Going back to the circle and holding hands, and it's this idea that it's like it's such a natural thing to make a circle when you're holding hands.
Mm.
Like it's holding hands like really brings that image of circle to me. And I guess relating it to what Sarah just said, I think there's that. It's like that thing that we cannot hold the whole by yourselves. Like you really need all those other people, all those other hands, all those other perspectives to kind of even have a shot at 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 looking at truth, I guess.
You're making me think of the first ritual that we all did physically together, I think, was around that tree on Holly's land. And we were held hands in a circle around the tree, and that's like the tree. And we created a circle. We had an axle. We had the tree.
Mm.
Mhm.
and that was very spontaneous. That just
Mm.
happened.
Mhm.
Well, spontaneous cultivated, because if Holly didn't make the beautiful route for us to discover, that would not have happened. But
And that makes me think of the the world tree in many mythologies, but specifically thinking of Yggdrasil in the Norse mythology, which makes me think of the Norse mythology and the way that that is cyclical as well. So at the end there's Ragnarok, and then you just have a few gods left who start it all over again, like that. And I think it's the same in Hindu mythology as well. Lots of these like pre-Christian mythologies are very cyclical. When it's all over, we begin again.
When Issa was talking about like holding hands in the circle, the word like belonging, because we were talking about domicile earlier and just like that lack of home or lack of connection to that, and the word belonging broke out into be longing, longing to be, and then like when you bring those together, there's belonging. And maybe somebody's already said that and that's why it was already in my head, but
that's funny that how the way we do that, isn't it? The way we're like, oh, maybe someone else has, or I'm sure someone has thought of this already. It's like, yeah, because we're all humans, we're all thinking the same, we're all playing this game together. I felt a bit like of self critique in saying that, like, oh, I'm just humble Sarah, I couldn't have thought of this by myself. Like none of us think by ourselves or for ourselves, it's all participatory.
Yeah, one last thing I just want to say about the circle is sort of I've been when I go and do contemplation out in nature. I've been really curious about shapes and just noticing that there's actually no kind of perfect square or triangle, really. I do know gadflies do make really beautiful triangles with the way they cut, with the way they bite somebody to draw the blood. But it's really interesting being out in nature and trying to find the perfect square, you know. There's perfect spheres, right? Like perfect, you know, whatever. But, you know, the sun and the moon, and there's a lot of circles out in the world, but there's very few squares or triangles. So when I look and I find the squares and triangles, they're usually all man-made, you know, they're made from human hands. So just an interesting observation, you know, just and noticing that, like, actually where you can get squares and triangles is through stars, points of light, or on the cacti, you know, they have these where their spikes come out. There's these beautiful points, and you can connect the dot. You can use your imagination to connect the dots and make more geometric patterns and shapes from it. But it's very hard to find something that actually has those dots connected. But just having a lot of appreciation for our ancestors and the stars, and being able to use our imagination to create new shapes. And again, this is that co-participation. There are these shapes in the world, and then we can also use our mind to create new shapes and create the world that create our world in a lot of ways. I'm kind of under the weather, so I'm kind of needing to go rest. I'm feeling my body starting to wane.
I was just thinking how beautiful your voice sounds today, and how kind of dreamy and lovely it is to listen to you talk, and it's just because you're sick. I was just thinking, it's like we're talking to Holly the poet, like the kind of like, I don't know, you've slowed down. There's a sort of like wistful tone to your voice, and it's very enjoyable. I'm sorry it's a result of the sickness, but yeah.
Again, it's a more fati, it's an affordance. It's like, oh, I'm not feeling well. Beautiful. Now I get to make myself slower and gentler, and yeah, it's a good thing.
Happy full moon.
Oh yeah. I'll be thinking of you guys when I look up at her.
Me too.
She's been so big this past few days. She's huge.
It's something about the time of year. She always looks massive this time of year.
Pregnant.
And now when I see mounds, I'm going to think of pregnant bellies. I love that. That was a great story.
Okay, beauties. It was lovely seeing you all again.
You too.